Hello and welcome to the Centuries of Sound Radio Podcast, the mid-monthly show where we discuss and give some context to the mixes. This episode is from December 2018, covers the years 1892 and 1893, and is co-presented by Sean. If you want early access to these radio podcasts, as well as access to full-size regular mixes, you can get all of this and more by joining my Patreon at patreon.com/centuriesofsound.
My lord and gentlemen,
Centuries of Sound.
this is the lecture for Night of Art, played by holding military band of New York City.
That was Holding's Military Band with The Night Alarm, and we are Centuries of Sound, playing original sounds from a year in history. My name is James.
And I'm Sean.
And this week we are doing the years... Which years are we doing?
1892 to 1893.
We're on double years still, because at this point there's not so much in the way of decent recorded music. Or recorded sounds. As you will hear, we still have lots of speech going on. This year is 1892. We're going to talk about the year briefly. But first, let's discuss what we just heard. That was Holding's Military Band. It's a normal kind of marching band stuff we've been hearing for the last few years. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I mean, even the accent of the voice at the start was the kind of thing we've come to expect, I think.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting because it has kind of sound effects, there's some bells and a kind of gun sound going on there, which, I don't know, it's not an amazingly impressive thing, but it does make you think about this tiny recording studio and how they were arranging all these things around the recording horn. Makes me think about that at least.
Yeah, I wonder how they got the gunshot. Literally a gun by the recording horn. Just fired it off into the rafters.
Yeah, so who knows? Who knows? But it's still kind of impressive to me, at least, for that reason. 1892, let's hear about 1892. What kind of a year was this? We're in the naughty 90s in England.
Yes.
And in the Gilded Era in the USA. What kind of things are going on in 1892?
Well, William Gladstone is elected Prime Minister for the last time, trying to sort out a problem which Mrs May is still trying to figure out now. Ireland.
Wow.
He's elected to give home rule to Ireland, fails miserably and retires and discussed a couple of years later. More importantly, I would say, Everton plays their first game at Goodison Park.
Why were they playing a game there? That wasn't their first game of all, was it?
Well, you see, they were originally playing at Anfield,
Okay.
and from what I can tell, either they refused to pay the rent or the owner wanted to change the name of the team. They said no, they left, and an inferior team was placed to replace them.
Don't know if I can agree with that part, obviously. What else is happening in 1892? Anything else?
In America, they are undergoing another general election. Grover Cleveland, who we'll hear a bit about later, is re-elected in 1892.
Let's skip America and England and go over to Russia. In the previous episode, we've been hearing about Julius Bloch. He's been recording the luminaries of the Russian classical music scene.
Still alive.
He's still alive. He's not alive now.
No, and he's here tonight.
He's not here tonight. We don't have his ghost or anything. In a sense, we have the ghost he left on the cylinders he recorded. This is Julius Konus. Julius Konus was a Russian violinist and composer of great fame, if you follow these things. And he was around for quite a while. This is his early days still. Following the Russian Revolution, he emigrated to France and played piano there. One of his sons, Boris, married the daughter of Rachmaninoff. So he was right up there with classical music royalty of the time. He eventually returned to Moscow in 1939, which is a very interesting time to return to Moscow.
Yes, he really can pick his eras, can't he?
I'm guessing that might have been the Nazi invasion of France that caused that to happen, very likely. And he died in Moscow in 1942, which is he lived to a reasonable age there, into his 60s. Okay, so that was Jules Konus, a Russian violinist and composer, recorded in St. Petersburg in 1892. So in 1892, as we've said, President Grover Cleveland was re-elected in the USA. What can we say about Grover Cleveland?
Well, Grover Cleveland, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the only United States president to be elected to 2 non-consecutive terms. Benjamin Harrison had a term in between. It's a distinction he still holds to this day. And indeed, he's the only Democrat to be president between the end of the American Civil War in 1860 and the election of Woodrow Wilson in 1913. So, there's about 60 years when the Republican Party pretty much dominate US politics. The Democrats, of course, being seen as the party of the South, not exactly a productive political legacy, but he's an interesting character. He's from the conservative wing.
If you have a look at a photo of him, he's a very you can't quite believe somebody who looks like this existed and was in charge of things. He's a big guy, isn't he?
I think the only man bigger than him in presidential history is Taft. He is a big guy, but also had a lot of affairs, which is fair play to him.
He got around.
He did.
Yeah, his huge bushy moustache must have been popular with the ladies.
He looks like a walrus, I've always thought.
He does look indeed very much like a walrus. He got married while he was in the White House as well, didn't he?
Yes, he did, to a woman he'd known since she was a baby, which...
So his first wife died, I believe.
Yes.
It wasn't a divorce. And, he got married to a girl he'd been taking care of since she was a baby. Yeah. She was very young, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was 21. He was in his 40s, I bbelieve.
I think late 40s.
Late 40s.
Yeah,
in fact, the first time he met her, he bought her a doll and a carriage. Which, is nice.
Slightly creepy.
Yeah.
She was called Frances Folsom. Yeah, okay. Let's have a listen to a few recordings that are related to Grover Cleveland and his electoral victory in this year. This is his voice. What do you expect his voice to sound like?
I'm going to expect high and reedy.
High and reedy. Well, let's find out if that's true.
My friends, we shall declare that this nation is able to legislate for its own people on every question without waiting for the aid or consent of any other nation on earth. Upon that issue, we expect to carry every single state in this union. I shall not slander the fair state of Massachusetts nor the state of New York by saying that the people of those states will declare our helpless impotency as a nation to attend to our own business.
So there's the voice of Grover Cleveland. Was it as you expected?
It was, but it's I think it's so interesting given the parallels to America today. This isolationism expressed in such open, if not quite so selfish terms, as a certain US president I could.
Let's hear. I mean, as part of the campaign, he had a march written for him.
Amazing.
March. This is played by Gilmore's band. Gilmore was the other big band leader apart from John Philip Sousa. And this is the Grover Cleveland March. So a stirring march for Grover Cleveland there.
So it's a bit different to Things Can Only Get Better, isn't it? That's for certain.
I think the same kind of general purpose, getting people feeling stirred and they're going out to the polls where they would go and vote. Unless, of course, they were black and lived in the south of the USA.
Yeah.
In which case they'd...
not go out and vote.
They'd not be encouraged to go out and vote. Okay, so Grover Cleveland, he was quite successful in winning re-election when he'd been forced out of office before. He wasn't so successful in that he presided over the Great Crash of 1893, which would put his party out of government for a generation. He was famous, of course, for his marriage to Frances Folsom, which we mentioned. Was that controversial at the time, him marrying such a young girl?
I think people remarked upon it, but of course you've got to remember that people did tend to get married earlier. So I think it's less of a scandal than it was now. And of course, in his first presidential election, much was made of his having fathered an illegitimate child. So I suspect marrying a young woman of 21 was probably less of a scandal than
I don't know. Maybe people thought it romantic in some way. He was 49 and she was 21. And from his photo, he doesn't look 49. He looks 60 if a day. So this is some comedy. This is a comedy cylinder that somebody recorded. It's unknown who recorded this. It's officially labelled as unknown, but it's suspected to have been a comedian called Russell Hunting.
A special dispatch from our War Department. Washington, D.C., June 3rd, 1892. To the Associated Press. Last evening, as the pretty little slipper, Frances Folsom, was cruising about, she was observed by the government ram Grover Cleveland, which immediately hove down upon her with the intention of boarding her. The Frances, seeing there was no way of avoiding the encounter, luckily lay to, threw her stern into position, and barred poles for action. The Grover managed to strike the Frances with two balls between wind and water, intending thereby to impede the action of her pump. As he bore down upon her, the Grover's polished ram struck the Frances at the waterline, penetrating her interior to a considerable depth. Although somewhat at a disadvantage, the Frances kept up a spirited opposition until the long tom of the Grover was discharged, which virtually put an end to the contest, as he immediately threw off, somewhat disabled, not as far left standing. It was at first thought that the Frances was uninjured, but upon close examination it was found that there were two holes in her bottom, and at an early hour this morning she was pumping water.
So there we go. That's
wow.
Boarding the Folsom by Russell Hunting, probably.
Made my eyes water.
Yeah. Nothing explicitly rude there, of course. It's not quite 9 o'clock yet in the evening. But yeah, that was a comedy record that was released. Obviously, that was not considered appropriate at the time for most households. What's your first impression of Russell Hunting's comedy record there?
I'm not quite sure what to make of that, to be honest. It was... Naval metaphors are always great for any kind of relationship observations you wish to make.
It's been thought through quite well, you have to admit. And innuendo done quite efficiently, I would say. Okay, so to move on to something a little more dignified, let's have a listen to a bit of clarinet from William Toussaint. Clarinet was a important instrument at this time, and there are many recordings of clarinet around this time. William Toussaint was one of the first, and it's a surprising piece. Let's have a listen to that. William Toussaint playing the clarinet there. You're listening to Centuries of Sound. I'm James.
And I'm Sean.
And we're listening to the music of 1892. We've heard some marching band music. We've heard some rude jokes about the president's wife. And now we're going to hear something from the UK. Unfortunately, there's really very little from the UK in the 1890s. But this is a British song written by a British songwriter for a famous British musical artist, Vesta Victoria, most famous musical artist of her day, really. It's not the version recorded by her, it's the version recorded by Silas Leachman, who was a guy who generally did racist impersonations of black people. In this case, he's not. He's just singing this song. It's a song that you might have heard of. It's Daddy Wouldn't Buy Me a Bow Wow. You've heard of that song, of course?
I've heard of that song before. My mum used to sing it to me before I went to bed.
Okay. It's compared to some of the things we've had today, it's a very family-friendly song. You would think so. There are rumours that the bow wow in the name had a double meaning at the time. Musical was a very bawdy kind of entertainment. We can have a listen to it and see if you change your mind about it. I'm sure you won't.
Daddy wouldn't buy me a bow wow, and sung by Silas Leachman, record taken from the North American Phonograph Company, Chicago. I love my little cat, I do, with soft like silky hair. It goes with me to school each day and sits upon a chair. When teacher says, why do you bring that little pet of yours? I tell her that I bring my cat along with me because Daddy wouldn't buy me a bow wow. Daddy wouldn't buy me a bow wow. I love my little cat. I'm very fond of that. I'd rather have a big bow wow 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 wow. Daddy wouldn't buy me a bow wow. Daddy wouldn't buy me a bow wow. I've got a little cat. I'm very fond of that. I'd rather have a big bow wow.
A slightly odd recording of Daddy Wouldn't Buy Me a Bow Wow by Silas Leachman, who's not a 5-year-old girl.
Perhaps mercifully.
Yeah, it does sound odd coming from him. every recording of his does sound odd. That one more than most, I would say. Let's go far away from the musical stage and from New York back to Russia, and another one of Julius Bloch's recordings of the luminaries of the Russian music scene at the time. This is Sergei Taneyev. So Sergei Taneyev is another composer. He doesn't fit the stereotypes of the Russian composers of the time. There were the Five and their successors who used kind of folk music as bases for their compositions, but he wasn't like that. He was more conservative and more austere than Tchaikovsky. He liked kind of Renaissance polyphony, that kind of thing. His approach was meticulous and painstaking and notable for an elegant command of technique. He had kind of a cosmopolitan outlook. He didn't have this kind of nationalism in his works that we expect from the Russian composers of this time. And this is him playing a piano duet with Paul Pabst. Paul Pabst was a pianist, composer and professor of piano at Moscow Conservatory.
Wow.
Professor of piano would be the person who teaches piano to other people, the respected piano teacher, so not necessarily a professor. Tchaikovsky often attended concerts given by Pabst, and he used to call Pabst a pianist of divine elegance and a pianist from God. He was the greatest professor of piano at the conservatory, and his students carried the great tradition of Russian Romanticism into the 20th century. He was considered one of the greatest pianists of his day, and he was admired by Franz Liszt, and he and Rachmaninoff performed many concerts together. So this is Taneyev and Paul Pabst together playing a piano duet. So I feel very privileged to be able to hear this cylinder that was lost for so many years of these two people together. And they're playing something by Anton Arensky. It's Arensky's Suite No. 2 for two pianos. So two famous composers there, Taneyev and Pabst, playing together.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting, the fact that these are two Russian composers. The composition is titled in French.
That's as we've seen before. The lingua franca of its day was French, and especially Russians. They would like to title things in French and use French words in conversation. So we see a lot of French from Russia at this time, not much from France, because they don't seem to be recording many cylinders quite yet. Okay, let's go back over to America. A famous name of his day, an old man at this point, is Walt Whitman. What can you tell us about Walt Whitman?
Walt Whitman is considered one of the greatest poets of his generation. He actually dies in 1892, so this is his swan song. His poetry is famous for its sensuality, including Leaves of Grass, which is considered so sexual that some people wanted to ban it.
If you ever look at him now, he's an old man with a gigantic beard that kind of straggles down and very long hair. He looks like a wild man from the forest or something. That's my impression of him at this point. But what else can you tell us about Walt Whitman?
I believe he knew Oscar Wilde in one of the great meetings of the 1890s.
It's a funny story, but Oscar Wilde visited America in 1882, so 10 years before this, and it's quite probable that he slept with Walt Whitman during this journey. So it's quite a thing to think about. Those two men were involved with each other briefly. It's not 100% for sure, but the accounts of the time do make it pretty clear that is what happened.
And we can believe it of Oscar Wilde, put it that way.
We can believe it of both of them for sure. They would both have been into that. We can be quite sure of that from other evidence that's around there.
If you're interested, look it up online. The account really is something.
Yes, it is something to be seen. So let's have a listen to Walt Whitman, one of his his only recording, but from the final year of his life. And there's a famous poem of his called America. Let's hear an excerpt from that.
America, center of equal daughters, equal sons, all alike and dear, grown, ungrown, young or old, strong, ample, fair, enduring, capable, rich, perennial with the earth, with freedom, law, and love.
Quite a amazing, wonderful speaking voice.
Yes,
I think he's got.
that accent was...
I wish there were many more recordings of him, because some poets, we heard Alfred Lord Tennyson last time reading a poem. Not quite so interesting to listen to, but I could listen to Walt Whitman talk for ages. So that's all we've got from 1892. Shall we move on to 1893?
Yes.
What kind of things were happening in 1893?
Well, it's a fortuitous time in both American and British politics. In 1893, we see the first meeting of the Independent Labour Party, chaired by Keir Hardie.
That wasn't the Labour Party that's in existence today.
No, but it's the forerunner.
Right, I see.
Keir Hardie is considered a Labour Party figure, so it's the first explicitly a working class political party we have in the United Kingdom, which is again what we see in America to a certain extent. This is the time when the working class really start to enter mainstream politics. And in 1893 is also the first recorded use of the Pledge of Allegiance in America.
We'll come on to where that happened quite soon.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, we do. But in America, there was some bad news for the American economy.
Yes, the Panic of 1893.
Which was a stock market crash, effectively.
Which, because of the American monetary policies at the time, which was based on gold, Grover Cleveland was a champion of using gold. The US almost ran out of its gold supplies, which backed the currency, which, of course, leads to run on all kinds of things, and rather soils Grover Cleveland's second term. So it's not great. It's not a great time to be an American in 1893, though there are some upsides, as we will find later.
As far as American culture goes, we don't really get a wide spread of what's going on as far as what's recorded. It's a very few locations, mostly in New York, they're recording. However, we do have the first recording by a black vocal group.
Oh, really?
We do. It's quite interesting to hear this because it gives you a real sense of what was going on out there. We had the spirituals, the traditional kind of spirituals with churches, and the songs that were sung by slaves before that, and we kind of have only guesses as far as that's concerned, and how that led later to blues and jazz. In this case, it doesn't really sound like it's in the blues and jazz lineage. It sounds like it's in the barbershop lineage. Barbershop is a strange term because it doesn't exist, really. It doesn't exist in the time that it's supposed to exist. It's an invention of later days. They had a revival of the singing groups of the early part of the 20th century, and they decided to call it barbershop music at that point. There's no evidence it was called barbershop music at that time. And this is interesting because this is pre those vocal groups, so it's this kind of, you can hear a link from the spirituals to the harmonized barbershop singing that would appear later. And the lyrics to this, I think maybe they do deal in kind of racial stereotypes slightly, but as it's black vocal group singing it does feel more acceptable and more understandable and better in that sense that they're singing this. So this is the Unique Quartet. They were unique because they were the only black singing group around, and the song is called Mama's Black Baby Boy.
I stole all the lasses from off of the jail. I'm a mama's black baby boy. I spilled all that sweetness all over myself. little black baby boy. I'm a mama baby boy. I'm a mama baby boy. All day, down to Christmas, and I'm a mama baby boy. He gave me 10 cents to buy me some gum. I'm a mama's black baby boy. I stepped in a saloon and I bought me some rum. I'm a mama's black baby boy. I staggered and stumbled all over the place, and the mud hit it splatter all into my face, and the people all say I was a disgrace. I'm a mama's black baby boy. I'm a mama's baby boy. I'm a mama's baby boy. All day, down to Christmas, and I'm a mama's baby boy. I'm a mama's baby boy. I'm a mama's baby boy. All day, down to Christmas, and I'm a mama's baby boy.
So something a bit different to what we've heard previously there. What did you make of that? It's a different kind of music, yeah?
Yeah, it is. It's well, I was struck by the fact that how you got four of you all singing together, and actually it's quite hard to get everything right all the time. And you can't just record bits of the song and stick it together as you can now. You have to get it all right, or you have to do the whole thing again.
That's the case for quite a while after this.
But I was struck by how disciplined, I suppose, they had to have been.
Yeah. If you were a recording artist, you were doing this day in, day out, and it just happened at this time you were doing it into a recording horn instead of to an audience. So, there was a lot more practice involved in being a musician at this time. So this was not the only breakthrough black act who were performing at this time. There's a guy called Louis Vaznier, and he did comic monologues and impressions of Black Baptist Church kind of meeting, and there were quite a few recordings made, and a few survived. And in the 1980s, there was a description of somebody listening to one, and it sounded like it survived quite well. By the time digitization had come round, that wasn't really the case anymore. I'm going to play this and see if you can make out anything at all, really. It's pretty hard to make out anything, and it's really a shame. As recently as the 1980s, this was a listenable cylinder. So that's all that remains of his recording career, and it's really a shame. I'd like to hear what that was. The reason that this has been recovered as much as it has been, there's a book called Lost Sounds, Blacks and the Birth of the Recording Industry. It's a really excellent book, and they put together a compilation CD that goes with it. Not just a shame that that's disappeared. More than 99% of recordings from this time have disappeared forever. We're getting a random almost selection of recordings that have managed to survive. Some recordings survived because people really took care of them, like the Russian recordings. From the other ones, it seems just a random selection that's managed to make its way through to today. Let's have some more of the popular music of its time. This is the 23rd Regiment Band of New York. Of course, we have quite a lot of marching band music. This one is a bit different, so it's a little bit of variety in our marching band music. I'm not a huge marching band fan. I'm sure you're not either.
I think it's interesting. We were saying earlier how it's all from New York.
It is all from New York. That's where the recording studio was. It's such a small business at this time that it's not really worth
sending someone. Yeah.
Not really worth recording elsewhere. So they just record what they can in their office in New York, the Edison offices, and then that's it. I don't need to do any more. This is the 23rd Regiment Band of New York then. Okay, so some more jolly marching band music there. Marching band music was not the only popular music of 1893, and let's have a listen to the biggest hit of 1893. This is a song that took the country by storm, the country being the USA. It's not as catchy as it should be for a huge hit, but this is apparently what they were all whistling in the streets and singing to each other. It's called After the Ball, and it really gives you a feeling of how ragtime really needs to come and sweep this stuff away, as far as I'm concerned. And it's performed by George J. Gaskin, who a singer who loved to perform these kind of maudlin ballads, which were so popular at the time.
After the Ball, sung by Mr. George J. Gaskin. A little maiden climbed an old man's sleeve, begged for a story to Uncle Sleeve. Why are you single? Why live alone? Have you no baby? Have you no home? I had a sweetheart years ago, where he is now, and you will soon know. Listen to the story, I'll tell it all. I believe her face lives after the ball. Bright lights were flashing.
So there's After the Ball, performed by George J. Gaskin. That's one of the biggest hits of the year of 1893, which we are discussing right now. Did you enjoy After the Ball? No.
I didn't, no, but I'm sure After the Ball, the then bit will be stuck in my head now for the next week.
Really? I don't even... It's so kind of dreary. I think it's... I'm glad that we have a new wave of ragtime music and other music coming to sweep this stuff away, because it's a bit of a rubbish time for pop music, as far as I'm concerned, 1893.
Not the finest year.
I don't want to be a snob, but 1893 is not my favourite year for pop music. This was a song that you would imagine people were whistling and humming during the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. Let's hear a bit about the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago.
So the World Fair was the US equivalent of the Great Exhibition, which happened some 30 years earlier, I think, in the United Kingdom.
It wasn't called the World's Fair, was it?
No, it was the Chicago World Trade and...
Columbian Exhibition.
The Columbian Exhibition.
I believe it's the anniversary of Columbus arriving.
Yes.
Is it 200th? No, 300th? 400th anniversary of Columbus arriving in the New World.
And it's known rather for its 690 acres of temporary neoclassical building.
Quite an amazing thing.
Quite an amazing thing.
The White City, I believe it was called.
It restored America's confidence in the aftermath of the 1893 crash.
So what kind of things were introduced at the World's Fair?
Well, we had Hershey's chocolate for the first time.
Okay, it's disgusting chocolate.
It is disgusting.
Tastes like vomit.
Your favourite cereal, I believe, James?
Is that shredded wheat?
Yes.
It's not my favourite cereal. It tastes like old straw. AC electricity was used to light up the place, I believe.
Yes. We had Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, fixing the image of the Wild West. In my favourite fact about Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, we're pretty certain it helped influence the start of World War One. Buffalo Bill's Wild West show toured Germany in the 1890s, and Buffalo Bill was rather uncomfortable to find a lot of German military attachés walking around observing how they picked up and moved so quickly. And 20 years later, Germany rolled across Western Europe.
Anything else?
First moving pictures showing to a paying public in a commercial movie theatre.
Wow. Some of those even still survive. There's a couple from that time.
And Little Egypt, introducing America to a more sensual version of the belly dance known as Coochie Coochie.
Oh, yeah. The Hoochie Coochie.
Hoochie Coochie.
The Hoochie Coochie. Yeah, and I believe the impresario who got those dancers over invented a tune on the piano, which you'll most likely recognise from any any film from the first half of the 20th century or even later that had anything vaguely oriental and exotic. You know the one? Dun 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 dun. Yep, that was something he put together on the spot on the piano there.
So sensual.
Yeah, well, it's just oriental sounding and exotic. That's about it. And the Ferris wheel, was first launched there. And I don't know if that was the first Ferris wheel you'd seen. Would you go on it? That's what I
wouldn't go on one now, so no.
I'd probably go on one now, but I wouldn't get on one if it was the first one I'd seen. Didn't look safe at all. Anything else?
Apparently Ragtime, which is going to come up in later years, had its first large-scale public exposure.
Possibly. It's kind of a theory, but Scott Joplin was there, so that could have been the case. The Pledge of Allegiance. Yeah?
Yes, we mentioned that earlier. So the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, was first performed in 1893. It's meant to just mark the 400 years of Columbus's landing in America, but it's been the litmus test of patriotism ever since in America.
And some other products: Juicy Fruit Gum,
and
Quaker Oat, Cream of Wheat. That's not a popular thing in the UK, but I believe that is still popular in America. A beer won the award for the best beer, and it got the Blue Ribbon Award, so it was renamed the Pabst Blue Ribbon, or PBR, America's Best Beer, which I think American listeners might be surprised that Pabst Blue Ribbon was voted the best beer. It's not got a reputation as being the best beer in the country. It's all right. Have you tried PBR?
I have not. I must confess. Other beers are available.
It's apparently a beer for hipsters in America. I don't know if that's still the case. I think it's a really cheap beer, so it's kind of...
Explains why hipsters like it.
It's an ironic beer or something like that. Anyway, it was invented there. And of course, aside from printing of books in Braille and this third rail for elevated trains and automatic dishwashers, we have another great innovation. What's the final great innovation of the World's Fair?
The first modern serial killer, Dr. Henry Howard Holmes, who said he killed up to 200 people. We can only find that he definitely killed 9, but that still makes him a serial killer, who had his own specially constructed murder castle just 3 miles from the fair in that classic modern American...
Yeah, so he had bedrooms that were gas chambers. He would reroute gas through the house into different bedrooms. He didn't murder people for any kind of perverted reasons. It was just to take their money, basically. But it was a series of people who came to stay in his house would mysteriously disappear and
leave all their money to him.
It was destroyed by an angry crowd, basically, in the aftermath.
Shame.
So the house is not there. There is a photo of the house that was taken shortly afterwards. There are theories that he was even Jack the Ripper. He was obsessed with Jack the Ripper, so... I think it's definitely not Jack the Ripper, but at the time people thought it might be the same person.
I think if you were actually Jack the Ripper, you wouldn't be obsessed with yourself necessarily.
I don't know. I think he would be. That's my feeling. I think Jack the Ripper was probably obsessed with Jack the Ripper. The World's Fair was famous for all these innovations and for murder as well. This is a recording that's not from 1893. We think it might be 1894, but it's a souvenir of the World's Fair all the same. And it features many of the different items that were available to be seen. It's called On the Midway. The Midway is kind of the street of carnival attractions and fairground attractions that we will see in a fairground these days. It's another innovation of the World's Fair is that kind of central walkway there. Let's have a listen to that. It's Isla's Orchestra, Edison House Band, and it's called On the Midway.
On the Midway, played by Isla's Orchestra. Now then, people, here we have the Irish village. Come inside and see the Irish maidens and their shillelagh. Admission is $1. Everybody pass right this way. Now let the band play there, let the band play. Open up, band. Oh, well, it's $1 to see the Irish maidens. Now then, people, here we have the German village. Get a good glass of beer and a sandwich here, to see my Aunt Panama. Now then, people, here we have the little hoochie-coochie dancing girl. Come right inside now and see the little girl do the hoochie-coochie. It costs but $1. Get me done is $1. One-eyed men, half price. Don't rush there. Stand back there, crowd. Here, little girl, don't crowd that fat man. Now then, it's $1 to see the little dancing hoochie-coochie girl. Move it up there, man, on the hoochie-coochie there.
So I hope you can get a sense of the World's Columbian exhibition there. Was anything surprising in that for you?
One-eyed men, half price.
One-eyed men, half price,
was-
indeed. It's a good joke.
Yeah.
I think what you can hear there is how they had the villages for different cultures around the world, so that was part of it.
A bit like Epcot.
A bit like Epcot,
Which
yeah.
I think is based actually on the World Show.
I think Epcot started out as a World's Fair kind of thing.
So
So
makes
yeah,
sense.
it is related to that. Of course, Henry H. Holmes was not the only famed killer of 1893. There was also Lizzie Borden, who's not so famous in the UK, but whose name still is quite well known in the US. Tell us about Lizzie Borden.
So Lizzie Borden, allegedly, in 1892, murdered her mother and stepfather with an axe. And the trial became a bit of a cause celebrity in the United States. She was known to often change her mind about what she said. She would often not say what she'd said previously, even if it would help her defence. The judge basically led the jury to an acquittal, scandalised American public life. But she maintained her innocence until her death.
Let's have a listen to something a bit more civilised than Lizzie Borden and her escapades. This is a flute solo played by Mr. Arthur Houston of Norwalk, Ohio.
By Mr. Arthur Houston of Norwalk, Ohio.
Centuries of Sound on Cambridge 105 Radio.
So let's just have a discussion of the literary scene in the UK. Are there any interesting books published in 1893?
Yes, Diary of a Nobody, wrote by the brothers George and Whedon Grossmith, which are two fantastic names. It's a satire of lower middle class aspirations. It's never been out of print since.
I do recommend reading it.
It is a fantastic novel.
It's a very funny book. It's kind of a proto Adrian Mole. I would say it's proto Adrian Mole, although he's a semi-successful middle class clerk rather than a teenage boy in the Midlands. It's still a funny book. I'd say even all this time later, it's still a funny book. So who were George and Whedon Grossmith?
So they were both creators and actors in comedic opera. George Grossmith acted in a lot of Gilbert and Sullivan operas, if you remember them from last time.
Oh yes.
Originated a lot of the roles. Was in Pirates of Penzance and HMS Pinafore.
Okay. Well, let's hear a bit of Gilbert and Sullivan.
Yes.
This is not not a British recording because we don't have so many of them at this point. But this is Edward M. Favour, Edward M. Favour, as he seems to call himself, with the Commodore song.
There are many things essential to make a Commodore, for a Commodore's the pride of all the nation. And of these same essentials I will mention but a score that it takes to make this triumph of creation. You will notice I'm the figure of Apollo Belvedere. You will notice I'm the hotel of a noble British peer. You will notice something noble in my general personnel. You will notice I'm the greatest of a perfect naval swell. Pride of all the Navy that no one can compare with my appearance so majestic, my exclusive naval air. You'll notice I'm a beau ideal for ladies to adore. I'm simply a nonpareil, a perfect Commodore.
You've been listening to Centuries of Sound on Cambridge 105 Radio. I've been James.
And I've been John.
If you want to find out more about Centuries of Sound, we have a website as well. It's at www.centuriesofsound.com. If you want to contact us with your comments, your concerns, or any suggestions of music that you'd like to be included in future episodes, which will be the later years of the 1890s and into the 1900s, you can contact us at centuriesofsoundmail@gmail.com. That's centuriesofsoundmail@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at centuries_sound, or on Facebook. If you search for Centuries of Sound, you should be able to find us. That's all for today. I've been James.
And I've been Sean.
Next time we'll be back with discussions of 1894 and 1895, getting into the middle of the decade. What did you think of the music and the culture of 1892 and 1893 then, Sean?
I think we're moving away from when it was only drunk men in parties and marching bands, which is always a positive step.
Slowly moving away from that.
But you are right. There is still very much a need for something to come and make music a little bit more, I hesitate to use the word exciting, but you know what I mean when I say.
It is lacking in excitement a bit, I agree. I think at the moment we're still talking more about it than listening to it, because there's not a wow factor in the music we're listening to, unfortunately. But it's moving forward. It's slowly moving forward. I know this here is a little hard going, but there is some interesting-ish stuff here, I would say. Let's play out with the one bright spark, we can say, of recording at this time. This is Back to Russia, with Julius Bloch recording all his luminaries in Russia. This is Sergei Taneyev, who's a famous composer of the time, and Leo Konos, and they're playing a suite for piano with four hands. So it's another piano duet. It's amazing how much the sense of recording good music that actually means something in Russia is than it is elsewhere. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Centuries of Sound Radio Podcast. If you want early access to these radio podcasts, as well as access to full-size mixes, you can get all of this and more by joining my Patreon at patreon.com/centuriesofsound. If you want to help the show survive, please also tell a friend.